You arrived too late. The air is thick and metallic, pressing into your lungs as if each breath must be earned. The narrow pass lies silent now, unnaturally quiet, as though the land itself is stunned by what it has just witnessed. Bodies cover the ground in uneven layers, tangled where they fell. Some lie face down in the dust. Others stare upward, eyes clouded, mouths frozen open, as if the last shout never escaped. Shields are scattered and split, their symbols scratched away by blades and boots. Spears lie broken, snapped under desperate hands. Arrows stand embedded in flesh, stone, and wood, so numerous it seems the mountain was pinned in place by violence. Bronze helmets sit empty, rolled aside, no longer protecting anything at all. Blood has soaked into the earth, darkened it, claimed it. There is no victory here, no cheering, no standing army to salute the dead. Only flies, only wind, only the low sound of breath leaving a place where breath no longer belongs. This is Thermopylae after the battle. After the last body fell. After the last stand ended. The legends are gone. The men who held the line are gone. What remains is absence, and it is heavier than any army. The past feels exposed now, stripped of meaning, as if courage itself has been torn out and left to rot beside the fallen. You were taught that glory lived here. What you are standing in is consequence. The world did not stop when the 300 fell. It moved forward, stepping over the dead. Decisions were made in this silence. Punishments were decided. Truths were buried. Survivors were reshaped into symbols, and the forgotten were erased entirely. History does not begin in moments of triumph. It begins here, in the quiet that follows slaughter, where no one is left to explain what really happened next. The silence does not last. By dawn, the Persians arrive, not in haste, not in fury, but with certainty. Xerxes is brought through the pass he was told was impossible to break. He walks among the bodies slowly, measuring what it cost him. Thousands of his men are dead. For 3 days, a handful of Spartans delayed an empire. That fact matters more than the victory itself. Xerxes does not celebrate. He understands symbols, and he understands danger. Then he sees Leonidas. The king's body is identified among the fallen, scarred beyond recognition, except for one truth. This man refused to kneel. Xerxes orders an act that shocks even his own officers. Leonidas is beheaded. The head is mounted on a spear. The body is mutilated and displayed. This was not Persian custom. Persian kings honored courage, even in enemies. Fallen leaders were typically buried with respect. Desecration was considered dishonorable, unnecessary. Xerxes breaks that rule deliberately. Because this is no longer about Leonidas. It is about Greece watching. The message is simple and carefully constructed. Resistance does not earn immortality. It earns erasure. Your heroes will not be remembered as noble. They will be displayed as warnings. Your courage will be mocked, your dead unprotected, your symbols stripped of meaning. This is psychological warfare, ancient and precise. Xerxes expects fear to travel faster than his army. He expects cities to open their gates before his soldiers arrive. He expects Greek leaders to look at Thermopylae and conclude that defiance only multiplies suffering. He believes the lesson has been delivered. What he does not yet understand is this: some punishments fail because they go too far. By violating even his own empire's rules, Xerxes turns Leonidas from a defeated enemy into a permanent accusation. The body is broken, but the story is weaponized. And Greece is listening. If you want to understand how punishment, humiliation, and symbolic violence shaped the ancient world, and why some acts of cruelty backfire across centuries, subscribe to the darkest punishments in history. These stories don't end when the bodies fall. They begin when power thinks the message is complete. Not everyone died at Thermopylae. That truth is rarely spoken aloud. Before the final collapse, parts of the Greek force withdrew. The Thespians stayed, the Spartans stayed, but others were ordered or chose to leave. Some were dismissed by Leonidas to carry news south. Others retreated when holding the pass no longer served a military purpose. In war, survival often wears the mask of necessity. But necessity does not protect you from judgment. When these men returned to their cities, they did not return as witnesses. They returned as questions. Why are you alive when others are not? Why do you still have a name when theirs has already become legend? In Sparta especially, survival was dangerous. Men who fled battle were marked by silence, not punishment, but silence was worse. No honors, no songs, no place in memory. Other Greek cities faced political consequences of their own. Withdrawal was later debated, reframed, rewritten. What began as retreat became strategic repositioning. Fear was renamed foresight. Survival was repackaged as wisdom, because history needs its living participants to remain useful. And slowly, something happened. The dead were elevated. The survivors were edited out. Names like Leonidas were carved into stone. The men who lived were reduced to footnotes or erased entirely. Their accounts were inconvenient. They complicated the story. They knew what the last hours actually looked like, and history does not reward those who disturb clean narratives. Survivors carry a different punishment. They are left to remember what others are allowed to forget. They live inside an ending that never properly closes. No monument records their guilt. No epic explains their nightmares. This is where many people stop listening. Because it is easier to worship sacrifice than to confront survival. If you leave now, you can keep the heroic version. You can keep the story where death is noble and clean, and no one has to explain why they lived. But if you stay, if you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you are choosing something harder. You are refusing historical amnesia. And if you don't subscribe, explain why in the comments. History has erased enough voices already. The consequences arrive quickly. With the pass open, the Persian army pours south into central Greece. Boeotia falls first. Towns submit or are emptied before resistance can form. The road to Attica lies exposed. There is no second barrier. Thermopylae was not a delay anymore, it was an opening. Athens is ordered to evacuate. Not partially, not symbolically, completely. Families leave behind homes, shrines, grave. Children are put on ships. The elderly are carried or left with prayers. What cannot be moved is abandoned. What cannot be abandoned is entrusted to silence. The city empties itself to survive. Then the Persians arrive. Athens burns. Temples are torn open, their offerings looted or destroyed. The Acropolis is defiled. Sacred spaces that were meant to outlast generations collapse into ash. This is not collateral damage. It is deliberate. Power is being demonstrated not only over people, but over meaning. To the Persians, this is victory made visible. To the Greeks, it is humiliation made permanent. Thermopylae has failed in the way battles are measured. The land is lost. The enemy advances. Cities fall, but something else has begun to take shape in the ruins. For the first time, the Greek world sees itself as one body bleeding in multiple places. Sparta's dead are no longer only Spartan. Athens' ashes are no longer only Athenian. The punishment has spread too widely to remain local. Unity is born this way, not from triumph, but from shared devastation. If you want to understand how defeat forges identity, how destruction becomes a binding force, and how punishment reshapes civilizations long after the fire dies out, subscribe to the darkest punishments in history. These stories are not about who won. They are about what survival demanded. Sparta does not mourn the way other cities do. When the news arrives, it is received in fragments. A king is dead, the guard is gone, the pass has fallen. There are no speeches, no public grief, only a rupture beneath the discipline. Leonidas was not only a symbol, he was a stabilizer. His death creates a vacuum that Sparta cannot openly acknowledge. Succession becomes uncertain. Authority fractures quietly. Decisions once anchored in a single voice are now negotiated behind closed doors. The loss of the royal guard cuts deeper than numbers suggest. These men were not replaceable. They were the spine of Spartan confidence. Their absence weakens the illusion of invulnerability the city depends on to rule itself. And then comes the fear Sparta never admits aloud. The Helots are watching. Every Spartan victory is built on the silence of a larger enslaved population. Thermopylae proves that Spartans can die in great numbers, that knowledge is dangerous, patrols increase, discipline hardens, punishments become faster and less visible. Dissent, real or imagined, is smothered before it can take form. Sparta survives by tightening inward. The story it tells outward is heroism. The reality it manages internally is anxiety. A city built on control cannot afford the idea that sacrifice might inspire those it keeps beneath it. This is where the legend becomes useful. Legends simplify, legends distract, legends keep attention fixed on noble death instead of structural fear. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you are choosing not to look away from what legends hide. You are honoring those erased when stories are polished for comfort. If you don't subscribe, you still benefit from the simplified version. You get the hero without the aftermath, the sacrifice without the cost. If you disagree, explain it in the comments. Silence has always served the story that power prefers. The Helots are not mentioned in the victory songs. They marched with the Spartans to Thermopylae, they carried supplies, they fought when ordered. Some died in the same dust as the men who would be remembered forever, but when the story is told, their presence vanishes. No names, no markers, no reward. Those who survived were not freed. Survival did not earn mercy, it triggered suspicion. A Helot who had seen Spartans bleed was now a liability. A Helot who had watched kings fall carried dangerous knowledge. After Thermopylae, repression tightens. Sparta increases patrols, restrictions harden, punishments become quieter but more frequent. The loss of elite warriors does not make Sparta generous, it makes it afraid. And fear, when combined with power, seeks control before it seeks justice. The Helots are watched more closely than ever. Their role in the battle is denied publicly, erased privately, and punished socially. Acknowledging their contribution would mean admitting dependence. Admitting dependence would fracture the myth Sparta survives on. So the record is cleaned. Later accounts speak only of Spartans and allies. The enslaved are removed from the frame. Their blood is absorbed into the ground without memory. History keeps the dead it finds useful and discards the rest. This channel exists for the people history edits out. If you believe remembrance should extend beyond heroes, subscribe to the darkest punishments in history. And if you think silence is neutral, if you think erasure doesn't matter, say it in the comments. History has always relied on people who chose not to speak. The story does not remain a defeat for long. Almost immediately, Thermopylae is reshaped. What failed militarily is repackaged as a moral victory. The loss becomes intentional. The deaths become necessary. Meaning is applied where strategy collapsed. Poetry is written. Epitaphs are carved. Monuments rise where bodies once lay. Go tell the Spartans. The words do not explain what happened. They instruct what to remember. The narrative hardens quickly, noble sacrifice, chosen death, honor over survival. A small band stands for all of Greece. The ending is sealed before questions can form. Once a story is carved in stone, contradiction becomes sacrilege. This framing benefits Greek elites enormously. It redirects attention away from failure, away from internal fractures, away from those who fled, those who were enslaved, those who survived. It turns loss into currency and suffering into legitimacy. And so details are removed. The Helots disappear. The political arguments vanish. The fear inside Sparta is omitted. The survivors are sidelined. The burned cities become background noise. Thermopylae becomes clean. Too clean. Propaganda does not lie outright. It selects. It elevates what is useful and buries what is dangerous. What remains is a story designed not to remember the dead, but to instruct the living. If you are still listening, you already know why this channel exists. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history if you want the parts of history that were deliberately excluded, the fragments that monuments were built to hide. And if you think the noble version is enough, explain that choice in the comments, because every polished myth survives on the silence of those who stop asking what was left out. At sea, the story fractures again. While Thermopylae collapses on land, the Greek fleet withdraws from Artemisium, not because it is beaten, but because holding the water without the pass is meaningless. Sea and land were never separate battles. When one fails, the other becomes exposed. Thermopylae does not win the war. It buys time. That time is spent evacuating cities, consolidating fleets, forcing alliances that would never have formed under less pressure. Strategy replaces defiance. Survival replaces honor. The Greeks regroup, but only barely. Supplies are thin. Trust is thinner. Every decision now carries the weight of extinction. Without the delay at Thermopylae, there is no Salamis. No narrow straits. No forced engagement on Greek terms. Thermopylae alone would have meant total defeat, glorious, remembered, and useless. Its value lies not in the stand, but in what it made possible afterward, and even that value has limits. Time is only useful if it is used correctly. The Greeks come close to wasting it more than once. This is where the cinematic version usually ends. Heroes die, music swells, history freezes. But war does not stop for symbolism. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you are choosing the full account, not the version designed for comfort or spectacle. You are choosing consequence over choreography. Xerxes advances with confidence, too much confidence. The army that poured through Thermopylae is vast, but vastness carries weight. Supplies struggle to keep pace. Roads choke with soldiers, animals, and spoil. Mountains and rivers are obstacles, not allies. The empire moves slower than its king believes. He misreads the Greeks. Thermopylae was meant to be a lesson in fear, yet fear does not work the same for everyone. Some cities flee, some rally, some prepare in silence. The brutality that should have cowed them instead unites them. Xerxes' displays of power, the burning, the desecration, the spectacle create consequences he did not anticipate. Enemies who might have fled instead fight harder. Allies who might have bent to him reconsider. Every body left desecrated becomes a story whispered in defiance. Overreach is not always obvious in the moment. It is measured in exhaustion, in stretched supply lines, in the quiet rebellion of those who survive. The king is advancing, but the war is bending around him. Thermopylae has bought more than time, it has created limits he cannot see. History often remembers victories. Rarely does it record the strain, the miscalculation, the cracks under emphasized weight, and those cracks are where the story truly lies. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you witness the consequences the polished accounts erase. You follow the path from calculated cruelty to unexpected resistance. The fear spreads first. Every city that hears of Thermopylae trembles, not just at the Persian advance, but at the reminder that even heroes can fall. Panic is fast. It consumes the unprepared, but fear is a double-edged weapon. It does not destroy uniformly. For some, it ignites something darker, resolve. Leonidas' death becomes more than an end. It becomes a symbol, a warning, yes, but also a rallying cry. Stories circulate of the king who stood when all else fell. His body is gone, desecrated, but the idea of him cannot be erased. Greeks begin to tell the story in their own words. They repeat it, adapt it, and allow it to shape their decisions. City-state rivalries soften in the shadow of a greater threat. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, they recognize survival depends not on pride alone, but on collective resistance. Thermopylae, a place of slaughter, transforms into a psychological anchor, a lesson that sacrifice can forge unity even after failure. Myth becomes survival, not to comfort, not to glorify, but to instruct, to warn, to ensure that when the next wave comes, the Greeks will act not as scattered cities, but as one interwoven force. This is where the real punishment of history emerges. Stories are weapons, and the mind is the battlefield. Those who live are haunted by what they witnessed. Those who listen must choose whether to let that lesson pass into forgetfulness or memory. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you are choosing memory. You are choosing to witness the full psychological toll, not the cinematic version sanitized for comfort. If you do not subscribe, ask yourself, do you prefer the hero's myth over the survivor's truth? Explain your choice in the comments. Silence has always been part of how history erases its inconvenient lessons. Bodies remain where they fell. Some are buried hastily by surviving Greeks in shallow grave under the weight of urgency and fear. Others are left exposed, stripped by Persians or scavengers. The ground swallows them unevenly. There is no ceremony for most, no names, no markers, only dust and blood and memory. Later, when monuments are raised, the treatment of the dead is rewritten. Heroes are imagined lying in honor. Graves are erected where none existed. Stories claim reverence, courage, ritual, but the reality, the chaos, the desecration, the absence is omitted. Physical remains become instruments, symbols, props in a story meant to instruct the living rather than honor the dead. Bodies are politicized. Their placement or absence speaks as loudly as any speech. Leaving some unburied signals power, retrieving others signals memory that must be controlled. Even the dead are weapons in a narrative that survives centuries. The cost of truth is silent witnesses, erasure, and the weight of knowing what really happened. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you see the story as it was, not as it was made to appear. You witness the erasure and manipulation, not just the monuments. Centuries pass. Thermopylae is remembered, but the memory is rewritten. Rome admires courage and discipline, and the Greek defeat becomes a lesson in virtue rather than calamity. The fall of the 300 is no longer a story of chaos and death, it is a moral parable. During the Renaissance, poets and painters further sanitize the story. Fear disappears. The panic, the smoke of burning cities, the cries of the dying, these details vanish beneath marble and verse. Modern retellings follow suit, the mess, the confusion, the human cost, all trimmed to fit the shape of heroism. After the 300 fell is rarely explored. The silence is deliberate. Defeat complicates legend. Survival complicates narrative. The psychological weight, the uncertainty, the terror, these are inconvenient truths for those who prefer clear heroes and tidy endings. And yet the reality persists, buried beneath myth. The noise of death, the taste of fear, the consequences for those left behind, they are still there if you know where to look. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you refuse the easy version. You choose the story as it really happened, the chaos, the terror, and the aftermath that monuments and Hollywood have long ignored. Thermopylae's legacy is not what the stories tell you. It is not victory. It is not unity. It is not glory. It is a warning carved in blood, a measure of desperation, a ledger of cost few have truly calculated. The mountains remember the screams, the dust remembers the bodies, the silence remembers the choices survivors carried home. The myth that survives, clean, heroic, inspiring, does not reflect consequence. It erases it. Thermopylae becomes shorthand for courage, when in truth it is a testament to what power, fear, and survival demand. What the poets omit is precisely what history should never forget: the agony, the erasure, the psychological scars that span generations. The real lesson of the past is brutal. Even noble death carries no guarantees, and even survival carries penalties invisible to the monuments. Those who remember the truth carry it quietly. Those who do not repeat the sanitized story, believing comfort is sufficient. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you choose consequence over legend. You choose to see the weight beneath the monuments, the terror beneath the poetry, the truth beneath the myth. The battle ends, but the story does not. Thermopylae is remembered for a stand, but the stand itself is the smallest part of its truth. The real importance lies in what came after: the silence, the fear, the psychological ripples that reshaped Greece. Cities burned, survivors carried guilt, helots were watched, legends were manufactured to hide fractures, consequences spread wider than any blade. History prefers clean endings, heroes, triumph, closure. It avoids the messy, uncomfortable aftermath, and in doing so, it erases the very lessons that matter most: how decisions ripple through time, how suffering shapes culture, and how survival itself can become a punishment. Thermopylae was never just a battle. It was a warning, a lesson in control, in fear, and in the manipulation of memory. The dead are remembered, the survivors are silenced. The truth lies somewhere in between, and it is heavier than any monument. If you subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, you confront the aftermath. You witness the human cost, the political fractures, the psychological shadows that monuments and myths omit. You choose consequence over comfort. If you do not subscribe, ask yourself why a polished story is enough. And if silence feels safer than truth, explain it in the comments, because every voice that refuses to look away honors those history tried to forget. If you have followed this far, you have already seen what most history books erase. The darkest punishments in history exists not to glorify battles, not to polish heroes, and not to comfort the living with tidy endings. It exists to expose the aftermath, the fear, the suffering, the erasures, the consequences that shaped lives long after swords fell silent. Subscribing is not just clicking a button. It is a choice to witness what history hides, to confront truths that monuments ignore, to honor the lives and stories that myth would bury. If you do not subscribe, that is also a choice. You choose comfort over truth, legend over consequence, tidy stories over messy realities. But if you do, explain why in the comments, because silence is always part of how history forgets. Do not let the lessons of Thermopylae or any forgotten punishment disappear into quiet. Your attention is the only witness that survives.